Hello, my name is Jeremy, this is Red Means Recording, and today I am very, very happy to sit down with Noise Engineering to talk about everything. In case you're not familiar with Noise Engineering, they are one of my absolute favorite Eurorack module makers who recently have branched out into plugins and the incredible Versio line, which, while still being in Eurorack, features swappable DSP-based algorithms for everything from wild as hell distortion to amazing reverb, delays, filters, and more. Some of you also may be aware of them through their work with Arturia, adding new oscillator types to the Arturia microfreak, the wacky little keyboard that keeps getting more and more features packed into it. Noise Engineering was responsible for adding new oscillator types to it, which expand its functionality. Their catalog of modules includes some of the most interesting performance-based tools, as well as the most expressive and interesting voices I have ever touched. Seriously, these things sound alive and have so many weird sweet spots that are really, really fun to discover. I could not perform without them. From the extremely popular BIA voice to the awesome modulator Mimetic Digitalis to the LIP, the Cursus, the Manus Ateritas, and the Versio series, you have heard and seen these modules in my setups and many others over the years, and with very good reason. They present an extremely useful vector of performability, expressiveness, and immediacy. And in case that wasn't enough, they went and put all of that ingenuity into a new series of plugins that are currently, as of the filming of this video, in beta, including the Ruina distortion, which is one of the most interesting and cool sounding distortions I have ever played with. All the tones, all the synth sounds you're hearing in this video will be made by Noise Engineering modules, plus some other drums and effects. So if all of this sounds interesting to you, and I really hope it does, let's sit down with Chris Kaiser and Stephen McCall and talk about noise engineering. Okay, well then, that said, who are you and what do you do at this crazy place called Noise Engineering?
I'm Kris. I am the doer of many things at Noise Engineering.
I'm Stephen McCall. My title is Chief Noisemaker at Noise Engineering.
In practice, there's 7 of us, and doer of many things really applies to all of us because we're small enough that everybody does many things here.
Yeah, I spent some time on the website before this just to make sure that I knew what you had already put forth into the world, and yeah, you've got a pretty cool team that all have a really awesome background involved in things. Have you both been with Noise Engineering from the inception? Is that how, are you the founders?
Noise Engineering started off as just a sort of lark hobby for me, and at some point it was making money, and we both wanted to change our careers
and our lives.
So
it's a great segue to kind of talk a little bit about both of you have really interesting histories. We have frog biology and game audio design in our backgrounds here. I see the frog in the background. That's pretty rad. What was it like transitioning from those previous things to Noise Engineering full time? And what was the spectrum like going from like, okay, we're doing this as a hobby, this is fun, and like, wow, this actually could be a career? Because I think that's a really interesting transition.
Yeah, the transition from it being a hobby to being a full-time job, having employees, another just kind of crazy thing. I mean, Kris and I are both people that plan a lot. So when we were evaluating this, we made spreadsheets. We, thought a lot about it because it's a big change. I mean, just pretty frustrated with where our previous professional lives had taken us for sort of different reasons. Me more just because I was burnt out because the games industry is kind of just brutal, very tiring. And I'd worked on a lot of very big projects for about 10 years straight. And it was just kind of like, I'm just done.
It was a giant transition for me. So I was a biology professor. I used to tromp around the swamps of Central and South America, chasing reptiles and amphibians. And so that didn't entirely prepare me to design modular synthesizers.
I like the way it's like it didn't entirely, but there was some aspect of it that did.
I mean, I will say that, there was a lot of it that taught me how to learn things. I mean, that's what my science degrees were. Chasing and catching crocodiles, less applicable to current career. There were parts of it that I really loved, but, there were parts, as Stephen said, that I was just really tired of. And, we never saw each other. And it's like, well, yeah. And we're married to each other. So it was kind of a bummer to not see your spouse. So we decided to just go big. So we bought a house. We quit our jobs. We moved and went full time in direct succession. And for me, the transition was to go from PhD global expert at some very weird, tiny, esoteric niche of knowledge of something to walking upstairs to my office in our house going, fuck, I don't know literally anything that I'm doing today.
If I understand it correctly, according to the blogs or the abouts on the website, the first module was the I'm gonna mispronounce literally everything. I'm sorry. I'll pronounce the modules that I have correct that I have myself correctly, but it was like a prototype of the anorexic. Sorry, what is it actually called?
Anorexic translatron.
This was your first. It's a voice, right? It's just sort of like the chiptune-esque, aggressive chiptune-esque voice.
It's a free running oscillator, 4 HP. I mean, it's software, but it's essentially using the algorithms that were common in 1970s video games. I mean, perhaps most famously the Atari 2600. And they used these very simple circuits that could generate a lot of very complex waveforms, but only like very certain waveforms. I mean, it really came from a person that I was working with who really is to blame for noise engineering. Basically, he had got a modular, he had it in his office at work. I had played with modular years ago, but hadn't seen any of the kind of newer stuff that was coming out. I started critiquing all of his modules because that's what I do. And he basically was like, well, if you know so much about this, why don't you make me a oscillator? I want an oscillator that can be a 1 volt per octave, but have all of the tones that were in the Atari 2600. And so I went home and made a prototype that weekend that ended up, eventually after me having to learn a lot of things, became our first module.
That's fucking rad. I love that. It's like challenge accepted.
Yep.
You came up with this module. It worked enough where it was inspiring to the point where you're like, this is cool. I enjoy doing this. What were sort of some of the steps along the way that helped you realize that this is what you wanted to do?
There is one module in particular which allowed us to do this.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You may have heard of the basimilus.
Yes. The basimilus, that was a hit, we'll say. And you want to talk about like
it still is
just a lucky beginner's luck sort of thing.
Like, right place, right time.
Right place, right time. Like there's so many things that worked out for that module. Just being the hit that it still is. I mean, the sales I don't think have ever declined on it. Like in some sense, the ability for us to become full time is just because that was a good product and that it had enough income to enable us to live.
That's wild. I had no idea the BIA was like that instrumental in the whole thing. It's really cool.
To clarify, it didn't really give us enough to live, but it was enough for us to say that we could probably make enough other modules to supplement and say.
Yep.
Everybody I know that has gotten into modular in the last couple of years has gotten to BIA. Like it just seems to happen, and everybody is always like, I cannot believe the range of tones that come out of this thing. And I'm like, yeah. And you don't even necessarily need a VCA with it. You can just it really is. It's a wonderful design, and it could go in like pretty much any situation and still be good.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, we've played sets where the BIA has been the only voice in it.
I bet, yeah.
And Stephen played one where he had, this is the joy of being the company owners, that he played one where he had 11 BIAs.
It was a real pain to use because it had 13 tunable voices. So just like getting it in tune was like a 30-minute ordeal. Also wanted to say I am still constantly surprised by the range that the BIA makes. Yeah. There was some real magic in some of those choices that was definitely not from experience or
that was blind luck.
Yeah. I definitely had a lot of good ideas that just all worked really well together.
I think one of my favorite things about the BIA, and this isn't unique to the BIA in your voices, but it is something that the BIA does extremely well, is the immediate access to like switching the place of the voices, timbres and output in the mix. So basically, like, you can go from like a really pure sort of like lead sound or bass sound to a noisy hi-hat in like the flick of 2 switches. And I have found that and the other dip switch mode changes in your oscillators to be one of my favorite things when it comes to performances, because I know that like I can change the complete topology of the mix that quickly, and I absolutely love that. How metamorphic these voices are. It's really, really incredible.
Honestly, that's one of our design aesthetics, is just really having that immediacy. You put your hands on it and you're immediately playing something fun, and you're not menu diving. And, you know, there's absolutely nothing against a module that has a lot of depth to it. But,
sure.
You know, there's definitely a time and a place for that sort of thing. The modules that we have made at this point, though, we've tried to make very much like, you don't have to remember button combos. You don't have to remember you press this and turn here and do it. You know, there's just, you know, you flip a switch and you get this. And that's very much part of how we think about it.
That's awesome. And that is something that that I wanted to cover a little bit more, sort of just your overarching aesthetic when it comes to what you're doing with these. And I think that falls into a couple different categories. And we can talk about that now if you want. Obviously, there's that part of it, the part that you just described, where immediacy and performance are key. There's the visual aesthetic, which I would love to talk to you about a little bit too, because it's unique in that it's not clean, but it's really, really readable once you start to understand just sort of like what's going on. And then the third one is there more to the sonic choices that you make with what you're doing, and the interactions of the way that the voices and controls work? Do you have like a sort of aesthetic sonically in mind in general? Obviously, the noise engineering oscillators have a tendency to be, for lack of a better term, noisy, but they're always musically noisy. Like, they're rich and aggressive, but in a cool way. So I don't know, is that something that you'd be interested in talking about a little bit? Like, we've got. Yep. Awesome.
Which one?
Where should we start?
Right. Well, so we covered the playability aspect of it. And everything from things like the switches to be able to change octave and mode are really, really dope. I think one of the other things I really, really liked, and one of the reasons that I upgraded my Cursus from a small Cursus to a big Cursus, is the push button coarse fine tune thing to change that mode. I love that, and I do not understand why everybody doesn't do that. It's a brilliant way of dealing with tuning. I think we've covered just how usable your things are, but let's talk about the design aesthetic, like visually. How did that come about?
Like the original basimilus, the art was actually done by someone else.
Work for hire sort of thing.
Work for hire, yeah, an artist. Sure. It's cool. I like it. And the AT, the Atarax Transitron, was same person. I wanted to put out more modules than they had time to do art for, was one of the issues. Actually, just hanging out with another friend who was familiar with graphic design enough to realize that I could just do it. So I just started doing it. I have no background in any of that at all. I mean, I've done a little typesetting for kind of just for fun, not for profit. So I had a little bit of experience with that stuff, but it just evolved from me sitting down trying to make something that looked cool that also was meaningful. Even though there are a lot of lines that kind of go all over the place and a lot of kind of funny symbology, we tried to make, I was trying to make it mostly meaningful. So like maybe double lines mean one thing, or, you know, there's, it's not a really consistent language though. And it definitely kind of evolved into,
we've tried to make it more consistent over time.
The early days, particularly when it was a hobby, like, you know, I might have an hour one morning to try to finish this panel. You know, it wasn't the amount of focus that we put on things once this became full-time for us was dramatically higher. So things in many ways kind of got simpler, but then they got more consistent too, which is good. So after we went full time, you, Kris, actually did some of the art for a while.
I took that over. I wanted some more consistency, but I wanted the consistency to be slightly less. I found it a little heavy-handed personally. And so I was trying to lighten up some of the art. So we fought about that a little bit. And
I mean, it's part of the identity. It's as much as everything else. It can be hard to let go and change
100%.
That kind of stuff.
100%. So we hired Marcus, the first person we ever hired. They can do anything we hand them. They're amazing.
Nice.
So it turned out that Marcus is great at doing the art. So eventually we handed the art over to Marcus. They've taken that over, and they've also kind of pushed back on some of the art. And most recently, like if you look at the Desmodus Versio panel, it's quite a departure from some of the other stuff that we've put out.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really is.
It's beautiful. And that
rad.
was Marcus. Marcus just really took a kind of a left turn with that panel.
Yeah.
But when they gave us a draft, we were like, that's fantastic.
It's astounding how much your font, which I'm assuming has not changed, but how much that font unifies the designs, honestly. Like, because I've been staring at the Manus while you've been talking and just now realizing that the saw mod has little saws on the top of the graphic. And then like looking over at the Imitor, I've never really thought about it being apart from the noise engineering universe visually, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely evolved over time. And one of the big things about the evolution of the style is that, when I was doing this in my room alone, there was one viewpoint. And one viewpoint will always miss something. And as we have more and more employees, we will argue as a full company about every panel now.
And about literally everything. But every little detail that might be different or whatever, we will talk about and try to reach a consensus about. The panels look and feel different because of that, but fundamentally they're more useful and more readable and, are better panels than they would be if I was just still doing it all by myself.
Yeah, it's as difficult to give up that kind of control as a single individual doing things, hopefully as inversely as it is to benefit from like a team of people you can trust to help you with that kind of thing.
I'm very happy with not having to do everything at this point.
Well, but to be fair, there were growing pains for each of us.
No, absolutely.
Our team is absolutely incredible, and every now and then I'll have this like panic and just be like, oh, but the person is doing this thing. I'm like, yeah, but we hired the person because they're fucking amazing.
Kind of weirds me out that people are excited about it. I'm like, wow, you guys are really excited about this, because there's some part of my brain that this is still just a hobby in my in the closet, basically.
So sonically, though, what the fuck? Like, these modules, they sound alive. That's the only way I can really put it. Every single time I think I know what's going on with one, I'll throw it a new form of modulation, and all of a sudden it's like it's talking in a way that I didn't know it could before. And I think that's amazing. And there's a reason that I have all of them always racked. Like whether or not they're all in the same rack, they're always racked though, because they're always going to be giving me something that literally nothing else can. And for those that are watching, like if you haven't tried these out, like you really are missing out on some of the widest range of timbres available in any single module. Like we talked about the BIA already being able to context switch like that. Cursus and LIP are both weirdly distinct. I mean, they should be. They're separate entities, but like at the same time, they also sort of speak a language that works well together. And then I don't know what the fuck is going on with Manus, but I've grown to love it like a lot. That saw mod with the LPF down, that thing just sounds like an alien. It's amazing. And I'll tell you, I had the Cursus going in, I guess, loop mode, wherever the envelope loops on its own, and you just sort of like can use the Master Blaster to adjust the envelope sends. It was generating those, in movie trailers now, when like you get to like halfway through the movie trailer and there's like a big sting sound that repeats and the screen like fades to black over and over again. It was doing that. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, I could use these for techno that rips people's faces off. I could use these for sound design in cinema or games. Like, so let's talk about how the hell do these things come to light? Like, what is the driving philosophy sonically behind this that leads to these kinds of things? Because they are incredibly unique, and I love them to death.
Let me just start by thanking you for pointing out that we have a reputation of being really great for techno. And
because we are,
and our modules do techno very well. And we both of us are children of the 90s industrial and joy, and so there's a lot of that background sonically that motivates us. But what you just said about using it for cinematic, it does. Our stuff is great for ambient. Like, you can do anything with it. But people tend to not think about that. So thank you just for pointing that out. I'll let Stephen talk. Most of what you're talking about is all in the code, and that is Stephen's wheelhouse. So I'll let him talk about that.
So yeah, the aesthetics of our sound. It's a pretty complicated topic. Like, there are definitely some sort of design pillars, I suppose, that really are all part of the kind of bigger picture of these things. Like one of the most important characteristics, I think, is just that all of the knobs interact in very complicated ways. Like, essentially there's like a real exponential complexity in the knob space, which is just not true of like a typical subtractive synth. Like the knob, and that's something that we, or I really have spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to understand the problem. And on the early modules in particular, like, I didn't have the toolkit I have now to work on that kind of stuff. And like the basimilus was just a bunch of lucky guesses. The fact that all of those things work together so amazingly well was less work and more just a good guess. But then that sort of, that footprint or that fingerprint of like how that feels has been, like a major goal of everything we've ever done since then. That kind of complexity is interesting as a contrast to sort of like, say, normal subtractive synths. Like, the knobs are very much like an engineering function. Like, this knob changes the frequency of the filter, this knob changes the resonance, right? And there's this one-to-one control versus operation, like algorithmic component. And a lot of our knobs are not like that. A lot of them do very complicated things, and they might do something for the first half that then actually changes to something else for the second half. But that's because that, like, often when we're working on these things, like, we'll have an idea for a feature, like, oh, we're going to add a distortion to this knob or something. And we'll play with it, and it's just kind of dull. It doesn't have a good enough tone range, or it doesn't interact really well. So we'll find something else to throw in that can often be a contrast that we can maybe crossfade kind of through the two things. Or something we do a lot is add just that, like, the top little sixth of the knob will add like a whole nother little layer to the whole thing. And so there's a whole lot of it's sound design really that goes on, and just like the hours that we spend arguing about like how this much of the knob range actually needs to feel and how it needs to change the sound is pretty intense. Like, that's
but it leads to that experience, that experience that we've been talking about. And I think a really cool example is what you guys did with the Imitor, the Versio stuff, at least in the Desmodus and the Imitor, with the way that regen works, where regen, up to a certain point goes full feedback and then becomes the ducking thing. Like, that's unique and it's cool as shit. So like, but that's like probably the simplest example of one of these sort of like, software decisions. So you're making a lot of choices regarding certain like types of math functions or transform functions on the sound itself or on the signal. Do you have like a sort of like a back catalog of these transformation like tools that you kind of like, okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, every particularly the early oscillators, like every time I would work on something new, like I'd be coming up with new things. And at this point, I have a big back catalog, and then just generalizing things like say when we were working on the AI ataraxic Ateratas, fundamentally that oscillator is always got a binary output. Like, there's a core part of the oscillator that is always either on or off, that's producing the main signal. And it's very hard to do, like, for instance, fold doesn't work with square waves. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Just makes your square wave higher or lower, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff in the AI that was developed because I knew that we couldn't do a normal fold on that signal path. It just wasn't going to work. So there's a lot of like, hey, I have this technique, but it doesn't work in this context. Then how do we go about making it kind of work in this context, but differently? And the AI has like a whole bunch of things built around things that are similar to what happened in other oscillators, but then all had to be different because of like the premise of it just kind of doesn't work with a lot of what we had done previously. But yeah.
Are you coding these? Is this something that you're like, is it like in C++ or something like that? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So, and I mean, for people that code, this isn't really that big a deal. But for me, I guess I was always curious if there was any sort of visual environment that these were sort of like created in or anyway. But I guess it doesn't make sense that would be the case. How much of this is something that you brought from your previous work? Like, were you already doing code-based stuff for the sound design there?
Well, when I was in video games, I was an engineer, like a software engineer. And I was working on the sound, the pipeline, the runtime, DSP in the runtime, all of the dialogue asset management was a huge thing. Like the last game I worked on had 250,000 wave files just for voice assets. It includes all the languages, but like the scale of some of those projects is just nuts, and it requires a whole lot of engineering. So I was essentially just embedded with sound designers and doing what they need, doing the engineering they needed. Lots of C++. I mean, I've been doing C++ professionally for about 20 years now, actually maybe more than that at this point. So that part of it is definitely covered. I've done DSP in games, so that part of it I had a lot of work with.
I'm so glad that you're using your skills for this now.
Yeah. Yeah. The video game, like, design notions, a lot of those I feel are actually very much influence our module design. I mean, like the whole notion of immediacy, like, you know, when you play a game, that first level is easy because it's you have to become invested in it, you know, and having that sort of feel to things is pretty important, I think, into making a module that's just fun.
How do you manage the edge cases of the interactions of some of these controls, and how far?
So much testing,
so much fighting.
Okay,
yeah, so much testing and fighting. That's pretty much it, and just hours and hours of just working with it and tweaking it
and trying to recreate shit that, like, no, I hear this. How did you get there?
Yeah.
You let all of these modules get nasty, like from just a noise perspective, right? You do let the parameters get to that point where you can just turn these into waves of complex noise. So that's rad, but I'm assuming there are definitely points at which you're like, I turned the knob this much and this knob this much, and like it's nothing but noise past that point. Like, how do we figure out how to like fix this?
Yep. I mean, both the Ataraxicateritas and the Manisateritas had the biggest challenges were making it sort of less noisy and finding more sort of tonal balances. Like a really simple example of that, like if you take any signal and you just keep distorting it and distorting it and distorting it, at some point it just becomes a wall of white noise, and continuing to distort it's not interesting anymore. Both the smash and profundity knobs on Manus kind of do this to some degree. As it gets more and more distorted, it actually will mix in essentially a dry subharmonic of the original signal.
No shit.
Right, so you're getting this more smashed and more noisy high end, but then we start fading in something that's actually an octave below where your bass pitch is to give you that bottom, so it feels like it's got weight.
You still have you don't lose the undercarriage, the depth of the sound. That's brilliant. And I guess this is one of the amazing advantages of digital oscillators, and coupled with like an incredible knowledge of DSP programming. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Like you to almost whatever you want in terms of like making these knobs do what the sound that you're looking for.
Assuming we have enough power on the module.
Yeah. I mean, computational resources are always what is the biggest limitation for us. I mean, that's another thing I spent a lot of time on, is just optimizing code to make it run faster.
So how has the evolution of the sort of like hardware, the computational hardware on these things changed over time? Are there many modules that share the same sort of core CPU unit, for lack of a better term?
We reuse wherever we possibly can to keep costs down. Like, at the end of the day, like, obviously modular is still kind of a luxury, but as affordable as we can possibly keep it, it is great. So all of the oscillators currently that we have out there are on the same processor. And we have a processor board that Stephen developed that the Manus, all the Ateritas are on one processor. That's just a small daughter board that we slap on the back of everything.
Is that the same for the Percedo versions?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
The surrounding hardware on the PCB is different because it needs different hardware for the
different knobs.
Different
most,
knobs, but different ADCs, that sort of thing. The main processing for all of the Ateritas is the same. So we've been able to reuse for that, but that processor is not, and Stephen can talk more to the specifics of that, but it doesn't quite do. The reason we never did a reverb until more recently is that processor just doesn't do what we need it to do for that. So now we have we use the Daisy seed from Electrosmith for the back end of the reverb, the Versio stuff. And that has been really great. We were trying to develop our own version of that, which we were calling the George board because those are our dogs, Daisy and George. And we realized at some point that we were developing in parallel, and that was just not cost efficient. And so we worked a lot. We were essentially customer zero for the seed board. So we worked a lot with Electrosmith on that board. How would you explain our relationship? They listened to a lot of our feedback.
Yeah, I mean, customer zeros, they were sharing with us what they were doing just to get our feedback, even before we had decided to use it, just because we have a very close relationship with stuff like that. And they definitely wanted to, just get a lot of input from diverse opinions about how their product might be used. And then once we got on board with it, then, just things kind of got more serious because we really needed it to do some things.
Yeah. And it was going to be more cost effective for us to use theirs because they could make it at scale and we couldn't. So we just committed to using the seed, and it's been amazing. It's a completely way more powerful processor than what we'd been using on the Ateritas.
Sort of.
It won't handle. We can't switch to it for the Ateritas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The processor that we use on all of the Ateritas is extremely weird. By modern standards.
What a surprise.
And the whole architecture, even just the audio architecture on those is really out there versus everything else. All of the oscillators are variable sample rate, so the sample rate changes based off your pitch, which does a lot of really cool things with aliasing because
aliasing, yes, I remember someone gushing about that.
Yep. At the time, that architecture was a very good value for essentially just the number of multiplies you could do per second. If just looking at it from that perspective, it was freaking great. And that's that, and the development platform at the time was okay versus a lot of the other stuff that was out there. Once again, the choice for using that early on was as much me being just this seems to work. Okay, that's fine. It wasn't like I was doing a whole lot of research, say we did later, about what to use. So there's definitely some just history and circumstance in that choice. But it's a fixed point processor, so it doesn't do floating point math, which means it's a lot harder to program because you kind of have to go back to the 80s for your DSP skills to do fixed point DSP. So there's a whole lot of extra development that went on to actually work on that platform. I don't think we actually plan on making another new module with it.
Okay.
Because the costs are going up on it.
At some point, it's probably just going to go away.
Yep. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets discontinued at any point in time at this point. So that's a whole another set of worries.
Yeah. And the fear is honestly that if we tried to port anything to the seed, like the Ateritas, it would just sound different because of the variable sample rate thing.
Yep.
That's wild. And that's not something that you can fake with math.
Yes, it can be faked,
but it would still sound different. It
sounds different. Yeah, I mean, our plugins have to exist in a fixed sample rate world, for example, right? So,
right, yeah.
So that has a simulation layer to deal with that. It sounds a little different. There's not, it is an emulation of what's going on the hardware. And it would be astoundingly computationally expensive to actually really try to accurately replicate what's going on. Variable sample rate output path on that basimilus.
It sounds
close. Yeah, it's really close, but
you have to know what you're listening for.
Well, we have things like Diva and Monarch and some of these VSTs that they will destroy your CPU in order to do the imperfections of analog. And here we have a completely different version of that to recapture a certain particular digital artifact, which I think I love. That's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of funny, to say the least.
So the Versio stuff is rad. I don't know how is that doing for you guys? Is it as big of a hit as it should be? Hey, this is Jeremy, just butting in real quick. I wanted to let you know that in case you aren't familiar with the Versio line, it's at the time of filming this video, 3 modules: the Ruina Versio, the Desmodus Versio, and the Imitor Versio. A distortion, a reverb, and a delay, respectively. To call them that, though, is a bit of a misnomer because they are, of course, in classic noise engineering style, much more than just those things. The thing that sets these apart, aside from their usability and sound, is that they are running a daisy on the back of them, and you can actually go onto the noise engineering portal and swap out the firmwares for any of the other modules as firmware. So let's say you got the Desmodus, the reverb, and you wanted to try out the Imitor or the Ruina, the distortion. You can flash that module with the other module's firmware. And there's other ones on there too that currently don't have a actual physical module, including the Ampla Versio, which is an ADSR controlled stereo VCA, multimode filter, gate, and chorus. And one of my favorites, the Electus Versio, which is somewhere between a reverb and a delay that's like a clocked atmosphere. Any of the Versio modules can run any of the other Versio firmwares, and it's as easy as hooking it up to your computer via USB and flashing the firmware. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, we have been really surprised. We were really excited about the reverb and wanting to do the reverb forever. And using the seed opened up so many doors for us in terms of being able to make it into a platform. And It's something that we argued a lot about, like, should we make it a platform? Should we make it something that people can just swap around if they want to? It turned out, like, we decided early on, like, we should just try it. And people really love it. We're really happy. It made us...
it's so cool.
Like, how many modules can you fit into one, right? We have a lot of people that really want us to, make it flashable from the front, which just because of the hardware, it doesn't work, or put all of them on at once. And, like,
switch through them or something.
And like they don't really understand how much computation is happening on that seed.
It'd be very hard to actually, just because of the constraints of the way things work, it'd be really hard to do that for Desmodus.
People will always want more. It's just sort of a fact of life, unfortunately.
But, at the end of the day, what that tells me is that they're really excited about the product, right? And they want to be able to have it, and that's fantastic. And I'm just grateful that they're that excited about the product. And it also meant that we had to develop our first web product. So shout out to Encore, our team member.
I bought the Imitor Versio, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I understand there's an open source element or like an open platform element of it. And my assumption had been that I would be able to load variations of the Imitor that would come out. Like there would be like variations on the delay, and they would have like slightly different flavors. And then someone in my Discord mentioned, you should try, like I was thinking about getting into Desmodus, and someone was like, oh, you should just try it. I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't realize that you could put any of them on there. So then, that's cool enough to begin with. I got the Electus on there right now, and I think that's my favorite that I've played with so far. Then I flashed a Eurorack module via my Chrome browser to turn it into a different effect, and I gotta say that's just wild. Like, this is the future that William Gibson didn't know that he wanted. Like, this is fucking cool. It's a really, really awesome platform, and regardless of what people like are clamoring for multiple ones, the fact that I could put 2 Versios in a rack and turn them into like a distortion and a reverb, or a delay and a reverb, or like I could switch around, and there's like a VCA filter one too that I haven't tried yet. So yeah, it's incredible. It's astounding.
And there's a lot more coming.
I also saw, I don't know if you can talk about this yet, but I saw something from Winterbloom regarding this, the possibility of things for the Versio stuff, and I think that's a really, really cool idea. I hope that comes to fruition. Plugins. Let's talk about plugins, if you don't mind. So as I said in the intro, Noise Engineering has been busy working on plugin versions of some of their modules, including the extremely popular basimilus iteratus, which is sort of a drum synthesizer, but a whole lot more. Also, the Cursus Verrer and the Desmodus Reverb. And these are all currently available via AAX, but when you buy them, you'll get the VST and AU versions as well when they're released. I've been working with some of the plugins they currently have in beta for VST, including the Ruina, the Sync Verrier, and the Vert Verrier, which are absolutely wild. You're hearing them right now. I cannot wait until these get out into the world because I think people are going to be extremely happy with what these can do in a DAW. We'll be jumping into these a little bit more in a different video, but for now, let's talk to them about them. We have a beta program now for the VST versions of some of your modules. You already have AAX versions. Is that what the Pro Tool format's called? When was that happening in your brains alongside the Versio stuff? Like, were they part of a similar chain of thought, or were they completely separate from each other?
Wanting plugin versions of everything we've ever done has been in the back of my head since the first days. Honestly.
Okay.
And has been in the works
like
years.
way longer than Versio, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a long series of
unfortunate
events that really put the plugins like years behind where they should have been. But I'm actually very happy with where we are with everything, more so than if some of the other things that were happening had actually happened. Yeah. So very early on, even like basimilus and the early prototypes were often developed as like purely in software on Windows, or often actually kind of at the same time, just because some things are easier to do on hardware. Sometimes they're easier to work on if it's in a simulation or just the same code running on the computer. So
meaning that you would the code for the BIA you would compile and then play it on the computer. To test out its sound and everything like that. Yep. Like as software. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of dead at this point, but we have a platform that is called Nerds, the Noise Engineering Rapid Development Synthesizer, which it wasn't a plugin or anything. It would just run a program that I could, play my MIDI keyboard and then work with some of the sounds for situations, particularly for bugs that are just really hard to debug on the hardware. Every now and then those come up, and so being able to run it on the computer with a little better debugger, etc., just save a lot of time.
Yeah.
And also just for concepts, like the XMOS platform that we used on the Iteratas oscillators doesn't have the best tool chain, and so like just throwing something together to do a quick, hey, I wonder if this sounds cool, like was just easier to do in software. Interestingly, our new platform for Versio stuff, it's actually easier to work on that than it is to work on the plugins. Just kind of the way everything is kind of turned around, both in terms of our code base just getting bigger, and then like that. The tools on that platform are just awesome. Internally, I was still doing a lot of development when Desmodus came out, I should say, the first firmware, I was still doing a lot of development for that hardware platform. It was a ton of fun. It's a great little platform. It can do a lot of multiplies. It's got a lot of RAM. RAM's a little slow, but it's normal for what we're talking about. It's not a $3,000 PC, so.
Is this the same? Is this the same Daisy that's on the front of that big like Daisy Electrosmith module that exists? Yep. Okay, cool, awesome.
So like you mentioned that we had the AAX that came out. So that was our synth bundle that came out in January with just AAX, and so that's the basimilus and Desmodus and a version of Cursus. And so that's still coming. We plan to do that in VST and AU. The beta that we have right now is 3 plugins. Ruina, Sync Verrier, which is based on our Sync Iter, which we discontinued a couple years ago. It was a small oscillator that was pretty awesome. And then Vert Verrier, which is based on the Vert Iter, which we don't have out yet in modular, but it will be out soon, hopefully. And it's also the same algorithms that we put on the Arturia microfreak. We are doing beta because this is the first time we've really done a full foray into all of the formats. And so, we, as I said, we're 7 people. We can test and test and test, but we can't, like, once we put it out in the world, there's so many new configurations and systems and so we're seeing people test them, and it's going really well. I'm really excited about it. But before we make people pay for plugins, we want to get some more tests on them. So people keep asking us when the basimilus is coming. And I'm just going to say not until after we finish this beta, so we can figure out. So we have one basic pipeline for the plugins, right? And so a lot of the bugs that we're going to see in basimilus, we would see in these free ones as well. So even if you are not part of the beta, when the beta ends, everybody will be able to have these for free. They'll be free plugins. And then eventually when that's done, and we don't expect this is going to be a super long beta, but when that's done, we'll do the bundle that we did in AAX. We'll do that in VST and AU as well. That will not be the only bundle that we released in plugins. And then we also have Reason Rack extensions that we did a while ago. The Reason people are absolutely amazing. Reason users have been so supportive of us. So any Reason users out there, shout out. We will be coming back to you.
Hey. How did the Arturia thing come along? I mean, obviously they depended on the work of modular people that did modular software by leaning heavily on Emily's work for plots. And code from that was open source. So how did it come about that they reached out to you to put some crazy stuff in the microfreak?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of them were just fans of our stuff, and they were looking to find interesting companies to partner with. So they just hit us up at NAMM. It took way longer, I think. I mean, the pandemic was a big part of it.
Yeah.
It just took a long time for it to finally come to fruition. But it was a really fun little project.
They were so easy to work with. They were super nice people. Adding content like Versio, right? Like you just they keep adding content to this little product that's like, I cannot believe how inexpensive that thing is and how much they have been able to do with it. It's amazing.
It's just a weird little thing. Like you're gonna be one of those synths that you see in like 20 years from now on like some subreddit for weird old shit, and people were like, "What the fuck is this?" Like, what the?
Yeah, it was definitely, they were interested in the sort of community aspect of it. That's what they wanted out of it.
And they certainly gave us free advertising.
Yeah, the response from that for us was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
We have questions from people that aren't me. So here we go. If you were to put together a noise engineering complete system, sort of like a make noise shared system or ALM system coupe, what would that look like? Is that something that you've considered?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for years. We have a couple of essentially essential kinds of modules that we don't make.
Yet.
So we can't really, yet. All of them are in progress.
Yeah.
But so that's why we haven't really done that yet, is just because we're still trying to, the mixer, that's a really obvious one. We don't have a sensible mixer for a case, right? So
sure.
We have thought a lot of different ways about it. I mean, there's a lot of different configurations that make sense. I have no idea what the final configuration is when we're going to get there, though.
We have plenty of ideas.
Yep.
Like you said, a mixer. Like if you guys ever decided to do a full-on gate sequencer of some kinds, that would be crazy.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Basically, you want to, and there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. It's just you're not quite there yet.
Yeah, but we definitely have a couple products that we don't have, and this year is just a disaster for prototyping because of the parts shortages and just time on the line shortages, and time on, our time too. Just the plugins take a lot of my time. Those have been dragging on so long. We have to get those out this year. So
noise engineering makes noisy voices, meant in a good way. This person says, what one filter would they pick that best tames their modules and turns that noise into a silky smooth voice of an angel? I don't know. What are some of your favorite filters to pair with your voices? I know you like pairings. Do you have a pairing you can do?
Usually with booze, not with filters. But, I like a simple one.
You're totally allowed to say your own filters too, by the way.
We don't have very many.
Yeah.
But that's yet. Well, that's another yet.
Yeah.
But one of my really simple filters that I really like the sound of is the Pole Zero. It's the SSF. It's 6 HP. It's really simple. Sounds great. It's got a little bit of distortion going on.
What's in my case?
Yeah. The only analog filter we really have is the Viol Arena, and the filter in that is not, you could use it as a filter, but it's not really the point of it. It's really meant to be part of the distortion, and it's not kind of a normal filter situation.
I'm going to cheat and say that it's not really a filter, but I'm going to cheat and say the Pura-Ruina.
It's an inverse filter.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's a full wave rectifier. It's part of our distortion line. It's admittedly not actually a filter, but I use it as a filter when I use it, and I freaking love that thing. It's probably our most underrated module in our distortion line, but like I never want that thing out of my case.
Oh, now I'm gonna have to get one.
If you've played with the Ruina plugin, there's one of the sliders that does. You'll hear some of the tones it makes. The control structure is really different.
Fun.
Yeah. I mean, the fun thing about the PR is sequencing. You're getting octaves of your original signal, sort of distorted octaves. I mean, in distortion parlance, it's an octavizer, but you can essentially modulate octave tones off of your fundamental. And it's just a ton of fun. You can make a whole sequence out of just like a sine wave into it and some gates. Like
I love that. That is one of my favorite things to do, is just send a sine wave into it.
I mean, so many of your modules have built into them the concept of going from very smooth timbres to like complex timbres. So that I have run the curses through I think the qubit prism just to give me an extra little bit of modulation, like the filter modulation and the delay. But I found myself that I didn't actually use the filter that much, the cutoff filter on it that much. And like I decimated it a bit, but I found that I was able with the curses to take it, and with the lip and with the Manus, I'm looking at all of them, and like and the BIA, I can make them go real nice and tame and smooth, and then obviously make them go crazy. Just built into them. Like that's one of the advantages of your stuff. Some people look at voices and they're like, oh, I don't need a VCA with this one, and I look at your voices and I'm like, I don't really feel like I need a filter with these. Like, it can be cool, but it's not something I would generally place next to them.
The things that you post really honestly blow me away pretty much every time. Every time you post something, I've joked about this on Twitter, that every time you post something, work stops here, because I'll put them on the team Slack and everybody's like, whoa.
They're my favorite voices to play with, and whenever someone sends me a module to demo, like the Total Recall recently came in, this is like it does modulation routing and sort of attenuverting, and I'm like, this is going into the lip. Like, this is going into the lip because I know it's going to make it shine. Like, it's just so much fun to modulate everything.
Yeah.
Yep. The premise of going from a pure sound to going, to 11 on the tone is definitely, one of our guiding principles. And that's rad. I mean, it's a very much a sort of West Coast thing as well. If you want to get into the West Coast, East Coast modular thing, like you can either take a complex tone and simplify it with a filter, or take a simple tone and make it complex with wave shaping, et cetera, et cetera. And we're definitely firmly in the let's make harmonics rather than remove harmonics camp. But, filters can be cool too.
We have a question. Any ETA on the Vice Verga?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another one of the... So this year, we announced a bunch of stuff pre-pandemic, thinking that things were going to be great. And then pandemic hit. And so the few things that happened during the pandemic, which is... one, it became really hard for us to build anything because of COVID closures and shutdowns, and not being able to have people in the factory in Orange County. And then California got hit pretty hard pretty quickly, and everything was shut down. So 2020, rather than prototyping anything, I spent most of the year, I redesigned all of our hardware to make it easier to build.
Oh, wow.
So that we could build things faster with, out having to have so many people right next to each other. And then we kind of got through all of that. And that's when the part shortages started to hit.
Jesus Christ.
And so the CPUs that we were switching to in the beginning of all of this have now essentially moved to 52-week lead time. Sometimes they'll say 40 weeks, sometimes they say 50 week. We have a lot on order. We have a few of them on hand. But we just don't have the CPUs to build things.
Yeah.
So we have, 5 modules ready to build and
it's
release?
About 5 that could be done within a week or two, design-wise.
And we can't release anything.
Yep. We have the Fractio Solum uses the same CPU, so priority 1 is just keeping that in production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're going to really try to release, and this might be on the next question, honestly. But the Univer Enter is we're still hoping to get that out this year. But it has its own additional, more than just part supply on that one. But
there's a whole lot of issues with getting that out the door. Part shortages are a big part of it, but not the only thing. And then the Vert Iter, same thing. Part shortages have been an issue. We should be able to get that out the door this year. There's a lot of software issue with that. So we need to make sure that we have time for all of the things. So
basically, just everybody should be patient because it is hell right now for anyone who's actually trying to produce things from the bottom to the top. Like everyone got hit.
Some of the most simple, basic parts. There's a op amp called the TLO74. It is one of the most generic, basic parts, and even those have disappeared. I spent an hour with another maker trying to find her op amps at some point. And I had our manufacturer on it. Like, we spent an hour just trying, like, okay, 074s aren't around. What's a good suitable replacement? What can we find? Where are they? Do they have them? Like, I spent an hour just like searching with her for other parts.
And then, of course, everybody got into modular during the the pandemic all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, the upside to this demand is higher than it's ever been. It's true.
And that's also just as a sort of point, another reason that people have asked us why we won't take pre-orders for things. And that all of this goes to the point of why we don't want to take pre-orders right now. Because, like, I don't know when I'm
that
would
be
those.
A bad idea.
I'm not going to take your money and then not have a product for a year. Like, that just feels like a dick move. I don't want to do that. Like,
this person asks, they want to know when the VST versions of the soft instruments are coming out. We've already talked about that. They ask what made you choose to go digital rather than analog, and I think we've actually answered that question. Through various means here. I think we don't need to jump into that unless you have like something particularly salient that you feel is close to your heart regarding this concept. I know
is the question why are a lot of our modules digital, or why?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's just quite simply is because it's the world I know. When I was starting working on this stuff better, I have some hardware experience. It was definitely never my strong suit. And when we started, when I was just doing it by myself, like, that's just what I knew. I mean, the words analog and digital are
misleading.
I mean, particularly because digital is an analog itself.
It's an analog signal,
right? So I would let's maybe say raw circuits and software maybe is a better distinction. And you could make like the ataraxic transitron. You could make that without software. The Atari 2600 version wasn't driven by software.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering.
Yep. So like that one you could totally do with logic gates as like discrete gates and stuff. And that's digital, but it's not software.
Right. Imagine trying to get to the global component shortage making fully analog oscillators the way that you're talking about. That seems like it'd be hell.
There might be some other, motivations for why we're getting the plugins out this year too.
Yeah, maybe.
So, to be fair, we also do a fair amount of stuff that is all analog. Yeah. Like, all of our distortions are fully analog.
Oh, okay. Sweet.
And more over time, I think actually probably be doing more percentage analog and more hybrid stuff.
This person has a few more questions. Do you ever see yourself making a standalone synth?
We've talked about it. We would love to.
Define synth.
I mean, I guess you kind of contributed to it to an extent with the Arturia stuff. Like, you dabbled, like,
enclosures are an issue for us. Like, we have a really hard time. And, as Stephen said, define synth, define what you mean. But for us to do something standalone, the enclosure is probably our number one limiting issue because we would be doing such small runs. And so getting something that wouldn't be cost prohibitive would be...
That isn't also garbage.
Yeah.
You see this all the time with like DIY synth kits and for like the LXR that Erica Synth used to make the enclosure for, which I built the old LXR and I got the like acrylic case, but like there's so many kits out there or like DIY standalone projects that like they don't come with a case. Like you've got to figure out how to do it yourself because it seems to be like the most difficult part of it for manufacturers to have to deal with.
It's a lot of human time and a lot of specialized machinery to make. I mean, if it's like a folded case, Like it's just an expensive proposition.
And minimum order quantities are
usually very
high or cost prohibitive if they're small.
Or or a $10,000 setup fee. To do any quantity, like that's
which is a hell of an investment to make on something, an untried product.
Yep.
Okay, so this person has two more questions. I'll just give them to you both. They ask if you're considering dabbling in the guitar pedal market. They ask what your favorite noise engineering model is, and they say if it's not Manus Ateritas, you can tell them they're incorrect. And then they say, favorite non-noise engineering module to pair with your favorite noise engineering module. So guitar pedals. I mean, they're easier to theoretically make from a case standpoint. I don't know. Like, is that something y'all have ever considered?
Do we want to answer that?
Yeah, you just ask your question and then just cut to like black censored or something, I'm fine with that.
Okay. What's your favorite noise engineering module?
I love all my children equally.
There we go.
I don't.
No, let's be real. They can't all be winners.
Yeah. No, we've had some stinkers. There's no question. But I have a hard time ever not putting a curses in a case. Like Manus is also just like, I always kind of want to go to some of those places. Like,
yeah. I love Manus.
I have found and I expected this to be true, but that the Persido version of Cursus has opened up my understanding of what's capable of it, what it is capable of from a timbre perspective, in a great way. It's got a lot of really awesome, expressiveness that I wasn't quite getting out of it without the envelopes.
Cursus tends to be somewhat underrated for our oscillators, and so it's really nice to hear you say that. I've always loved Cursus. It's one of my favorites because it's probably the softest of them. It's just it can be very pretty. They can all be pretty if you dial it in, right? But Cursus, I think, is just a little bit easier to get there.
Cursus is just always my bass. It just works really well in that register, and you get some really great timbre changes with the tones that really work well in that role. The quality that wavetable oscillators tend to have, where they have an insane amount of high harmonics and therefore they like play nicely down in lower octaves, I think is what I was trying to get at. Cursus definitely does well with that. And some of that is kind of because the wavetable actually works a little better at lower frequencies. That's actually absolutely true. And it's one of the kind of other strange properties of our oscillators is they actually spectrally often are very different in different octaves. Right, like there's a real timbre change as you go up, which is much more like a real instrument and less like a sawtooth that is perfectly made to just track octaves. You mentioned that like they kind of feel alive, and I kind of feel like that's one of the things that gives that feeling. It's just like the timbre changes a lot as you're changing pitch.
Is that a function of the sample rate and the aliasing stuff? Is that part of what's going on there?
It's all part of that, yeah. But there's only one octave worth of sample rate. So there's actually a transition zone where it actually halves the sample rate. And then as you track up again, it goes up, and then it halves the sample rate. And so the octaves are actually at half sample rates, versus the pitch, right? So the higher frequencies have half as many samples per pitch cycle. So the interpolation actually gets a little more coarse as you get to higher frequencies, which makes the aliasing loses a little bit of detail, but then gives you this interesting, consistently changing timbre as well.
Thank you again so much for spending time with me and us. Everyone here is watching. I hope that everyone's burning questions were answered and that they know that more good noise engineering stuff is coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. This was an absolute blast. And if your burning questions weren't answered, please just drop us a line.
All right. Take care of yourselves.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that video on noise engineering. I really, really, really enjoyed talking with Kris and Stephen about everything that they were willing to talk about. And thank you for sending in questions to the patrons that did. Please do check the links in the description to check out more about noise engineering, check out their modules, check out the plugins, check out their blog where they make really, really, really useful blog entries and talk about not only the philosophy behind some of their stuff, but their amazing employees. And yeah, it's just a really, really, really awesome company. And I think that they deserve all of the success that could come to them. Thanks for watching. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.